Hello, friends. My name is Host Eric, and I am the host of Talking with Famous People, the internet television program that turns your whole life into an explosive, wonderful, majestic experience of joy, which is more than most YouTube channels do for you, or even consider offering to do. What is up, old man? You must not be talking to me. I'm not an old man.
No way. Good night.
Good night, my precious angel.
I love you.
Perhaps there's an old man in the background of one of my pictures. That would explain perhaps your misconception here. I'm confused. I'm clearly not old. I'm as young as Psy, whose last name was Young, obviously. For those who didn't understand the reference, I will eventually get better at this whole green screen thing. I'm starting to figure out, some basics about how it operates. I'm just shooting something with fire, don't mind me. I like to shoot things with fire. What you're saying is you just consumed half a bottle of brandy? Well, I would say that is an experience that comprises, a lot of young people's occasions. It's fair to say that a lot of young people will occasionally indulge in said fashion, and and you're not unusual in that regard. So you shouldn't feel too much shame right now about your failures. Just feel okay about it. Alright, so, oh, you're pretty young, Cloud. You're younger than me. And that's pretty young. Because I'm pretty young. I'm not even 50 years old yet. That makes me a spring chicken. I don't know if you've heard that expression before. Spring chicken. You're turning 21 in about 2 weeks. Well, good for you. Congratulations. You've lived almost 21 years. That's better than people who don't live that long. Comparatively. You've done a superior job of staying alive. Oh, Cloud, stop saying those sort of things. Don't say those sort of things. They're terrible sort of things to say that only dumb young men say, Come on now, Cloud. That's ridiculous. Yes, you do. Give your later self some credit. After all, presumably, you're learning things now, and you want to be able to be a self that has more things at your disposal than you currently do, which means you want to take advantage of a future self that's more well-informed than the current one. A lot of nihilism going on tonight. Hi, Octavia Silva. I guess everyone needs a little bit of positive energy from old host Eric tonight, and that's fine. I'm ready and willing to bring it. Look, life is good. Now, I understand that your experience and my experience are not the same. But what I mean by life is good is not just that life is good right now for me, which it sort of is, but that life gives you endless shots at bat. Every day is a new opportunity to say, you know what, today I'm going to go, whatever it is. Well, I think it's odd that you think anything over 30 is old. I mean, it might suck to be very, very old, but as you can see in me, Cloud, growing older does not mean necessarily abandoning all one's childish ways. So, it does involve a greater degree of humility and wisdom as you get older, probably, than you have when you're young. But that doesn't mean you give up who you are. That doesn't mean you stop being able to find satisfaction in self-improvement or development or whatever you want to call it. Well, maybe you need to develop some more mature version of self that you can understand then. And that probably will happen naturally as you age. I want you to feel confident about your growth and development over time, that you're not going to no, I never mistyped myself as INTP of templates. I've never typed myself as anything but ENTP. My mistyping of my daughter stemmed from the fact that I just didn't understand cognitive functions very well back then, in part, and I didn't have an SI link. In other words, a good example of a female ENTP to compare against. With Taylor thought he was ENTP, but I typed him as ESTP, and then believed him when he said, nope, I'm actually ENTP, but that was, again, a long time ago. I wouldn't make either of those mistakes anymore. No siree, Bob. So this is a personality type and cognitive function Q&A video. I'm going to try to remain as faithful as I can to that title. So if anybody has any Q's, I'll provide A's. If anybody wants me to ask some Q's, I can ask some Q's too, and you can provide A's. For example, I really actually would be interested in hearing what everybody's first encounter with typology was like, and what their initial walk away from it was. Like, did they walk away with the wrong type? Did they walk away with a uncertainty about their type, or clarity as it remained the same ever since, etc.? I'd be interested in hearing that. So that's a Q from me if anybody wants me to ask a Q. Octavio Silva says, explain to me the difference between ESTJ and ENTJ. Good question. Sorry for the delay while I chewed there. ESTJ's third slot extroverted intuition is very self-serving and self-gratifying. ENTJ's sixth slot extroverted intuition is concessionary. It's like, okay, I understand that I'm going to need to provide some extroverted intuition as well here, so here you go. In terms of how that plays out in their lives, ESTJs like to talk a lot, and your job is to listen. ENTJs have a much different relationship with that. They are perfectly comfortable mostly doing more or an equivalent amount of listening and talking. They usually have a purpose for the conversation anyway, right? You can make an ESTJ happy just by listening to them ramble on about their stories. This is probably true regardless of age. So if you got a 28-year-old ESTJ friend and they like to tell you about what they did today at work or stuff like that, or little anecdotes and stuff, they're not looking for you to engage with them really about it. They're just looking for you to listen and respond, like, laugh at appropriate spots, be impressed, or be enjoy it or whatever. And then, ideally, if, from their perspective, them go on to the next little story. ENTJs are not interested in having one-sided conversations like that. So that's the number one distinction. But additionally, ESTJs feel like they fail when their extrovert intuition doesn't anticipate something that potentially runs afoul of their plans. ENTJs blame extroverted intuition when something fails. So it's, like that. Is DI the calmest function, Eric? Well, let me answer that in a second. I want to read this other thing here. These first encounter stories. My first encounter, says Cloud, was my ESTP friend urging me to take the test, and I've gotten ENTP every single time, which is revelatory about the tests, right? My Octavia Silva says my first was a link to a test on Tumblr, got ISFJ, but didn't vibe with it. Looked into ISFP, agreed sense, found it to be more useful for typing others rather than learning about myself. Cool, which would make sense for an FI Dom. You figure you have a sort of like foundational understanding of the self through FI that no abstract understanding of the self could better, So, is TI the calmest function? I don't think calm goes with a function, really. It's an interesting question. I would say that people who are TI DOMs are likely to seem calmer than people who are NE DOMs, for example. But calmness is something that is expressed, changes from moment to moment. While it might be true that a person overall is more calm or less calm compared to a norm, everybody has moments of uncalm as well. So I would say that it doesn't really link to cognitive functions like that. In other words, you can have a very calm TI user, or you can have, as Octavia Silva says here, Eric, when you rage, you're in TI mode most of the time. I'd like to think I'm in TI mode now, but I'm not raging. So it's not. I would say that there's not really a clear link between those two things. Some types are likely to be perceived as calmer, for sure. Like Cloud asks, Eric, where is my SE? I don't sense it at all. Okay. What do you think Michael Pierce's interpretation of the quadrants? He calls NESITIFE front stack Democrats. NESIFITE the anarchists. NISETIFE the theocrats. And NISEFITE the monarchs. I mean, I would say Beta Quadra is the most imperious quadra. So they're the ones who are most likely, best called the monarchs. As far as theocrats go, I mean, I would agree that, Alpha's democratic. NEFI is, I wouldn't call him anarchistic at all. I would just say, I mean, I get what he's getting at probably, which is that they are anarchistic ultimately, but they don't advocate anarchy, you know? And why why the beta quad would be theocrats, I'm not sure. Like, what's the difference between a theocrat and a monarch in that instance? What specific distinction is it trying to be drawn there? What is the difference in how third or fourth slots TI would play out? Well, for example, uh, Michael Pierce is an INFJ, and he's got third slot TI. So he's probably got a pretty good answer to those questions that I just asked about why theocrats, why monarchs, why anarchists. If I were to ask a fourth slot TI person to explain, and it was their idea, they probably wouldn't have very clear answers to those questions. I don't think, because I have second slot TI, I doubt Michael Pierce's answers would satisfy me and my TI. I'd still think them as metaphorical, but that's one answer to the question: the difference between third and fourth TI. I think you can express your feelings through any function. When you are frustrated, you attack the logic of others. Well, I mean, I think you can experience feelings. And that doesn't preclude you from using other functions. I'd agree. But it's not a matter of whether you're experiencing them so much as whether you're paying attention to them. If you're not paying attention to them, they may influence you dramatically without you really having good awareness that they're influencing you or how they're influencing you. When you're frustrated, you attack the logic of others. What is the difference between Eric, you need to realize that you are not in TI mode, you are in NETIFE mode. Your brain is not a switch that just adapts to a situation, all your functions act simultaneously. Well, they definitely don't. One of the, I guess, biophysical aspects of the brain that socionics is built off of, and the idea of cognitive functions actually links to directly, is the what you call locality suppression. So it's like when one area of the brain lights up, the areas immediately surrounding it are suppressed. So we know that there's an inverse proportionality to certain aspects of consciousness with other aspects, okay? So remember, Cloud, that we're not exactly talking about an order of operations. We're not talking about some metaphorical, you know, reduction of something that's actually more complicated or anything. We're talking simply about the fact that people do pay attention in different ways, and that those ways sometimes have a either exclusive or proportional or inversely proportional relationship. Okay? This is biophysically so, and suggested by the locality suppression effect in the brain. Obviously, it is the case that if we can distinguish between channels of attention as meaningfully distinct and bearing some of those mechanical distinct qualities in terms of relationship, then it necessarily must be the case that there's a finite amount of time you can spend in one attentional manner without necessarily sacrificing an equivalent amount of time from another attentional manner, at least in terms of consciously applying it. So these distinctions are real, they're meaningful. Obviously, we're talking about a map. So remember, Cloud, maps aren't the actual thing. Maps and territory are different. So if you're going to critique a map for being a map, well, you can do that, but that's simply not affording due jurisdiction to the appropriate area where it's deserved. Okay. Why is TI native to NE or SE? What does this mean? Well, to the extent that I say it's native to those things, what I mean is you can't have a deliberation function without it being paired with an action function. You can't have deliberation and interface. And the reason is because the nature of the action function is such that it requires a you might say like a program or whatever. It requires a macro be implemented that takes advantage of something that is turn based. So if I plan my next chess move, it's a turn based reality. I've thought it all out, and I pick up my piece and I move it. I don't have to worry about my opponent, jumping across the table as I'm about to put it there, knocking it out of my hand and saying, aha. There's no dynamic aspect to it. There's the dynamics of me actually moving the piece, but there's only two statuses, the old status and the new status. So that's what's an example of something that is deliberated out in full and then acted out in full as a step before there's a next person's turn, so to speak, right? There's a lot of stuff in life that operates like that, where TI is a function that is native to that kind of operation, which is to say it's native to the metaphysical plane, where we have a turn-based understanding of time rather than a linear or fluid understanding of time. Let's see. I mean, no, I haven't considered. All right, so some human asks, Eric, have you ever considered using different semantics for describing the functions, like collapsing NI, SE, or TEFI somehow instead of 8 slots, some other kind of representation? No, because 8 is native to reality, basically. The reason that Jung was fundamentally right in his insight was because it turns out, he didn't even understand why he was right, but he was right. It turns out that, in fact, humans are endowed with basically 4 kinds of functions: knowledge functions, deliberation functions, action functions, and interface functions. And that the key differentiation between those two things is whether they represent a strategy of approaching a static system or a dynamic system. So knowledge and interface is the required pairing to interface with a dynamic system. That's why it's called, interfacing. In other words, it's not turn-based, but it may be turn-based, but it requires some sort of dynamic element as well. So, for example, if I go to a meeting to try to convince people to sign on to this contract or something, then it's a dynamic system that I've got to interface with both on TE grounds and on FE grounds. And what does that mean? It means I've got to point to specific outcomes and benefits, and I've also got to schmooze people. Those are both dynamic things. I've got to show that in this dynamic system, this particular plan is going to produce net benefits for all the various parties here involved. That's an interfacing thing. Depending on the people's questions and challenges is what I'm going to have to respond to. In contrast, if I were to deliver a speech, then I'd have the whole speech written out ahead of time, deliver it, then they'd have their turn. So the point is, some systems are dynamic and some systems are more static, but most systems are somewhat both. Now, being either an action deliberation type or an interface knowledge type tells you simply whether you're more natively comfortable in circumstances that utilize more dynamic systems or circumstances that use more static systems. The courts, for example, are an example of a form that uses very turn-based kind of system. So it's really conducive to action deliberation in terms of engaging with the system in a winning way. However, it also has a lot of TE elements, a lot of hoops to jump through. It's not enough to win the argument. You've got to file the paperwork at the right time and all this other shit, right? So in that regard, there's a barrier to entry that TE functions as. No, I've never read the book Psychological Types. I've read excerpts from Jung and read all kinds of things all over the internet from different sources, etc. The important thing to remember is what I've done is from every single thing that I've read, I've kept and collected the ideas and concepts that work and maintain logically. I've abandoned the rest of them, and where needed, I have filled in gaps to explain the thing in a way that it actually holds water. Remembering that I, as a profession, build cases for watertightness, obviously my understanding of cognitive functions is going to be validate best because most of the other people doing this sort of thing have no idea what they're doing. They're not rhetorically knowledgeable. Okay, so what do I think about the distinction between sex and gender? Well, I think gender is an arbitrary ontological claim, which can certainly be made, and is part of one's owning their own perceptions of themselves and others. But on the other hand, I would say that sex is non-arbitrary, and it has to do with chromosomes, and that the current problem with politics regarding sex and gender is a misunderstanding of what's being presented as an identity issue, you know. Okay, so he said, consequently, disparity between static and dynamic systems is not one that is exclusive, but is. I do not know what that means. Never heard that word before. Is that really a word? That's not a word. I don't know what you were trying to say, but it wasn't that, obviously. Okay. Is one that's inclusive. Consequently, a disparity between static and dynamic systems is not one that is exclusive, but one that is inclusive. You're gonna have to explain exactly what you mean here more. I don't think I disagree with you, but the fact is ontologies are not thusly inclusive. In other words, they represent one strategy. Octavio, you may be looking at NI polar. I had an interaction with a drunk ESFJ who refused to engage with some TI I tried to provide. It was bullshit because TIing is not my job. Do you think that popularism makes people override their desire based on the fear of rejection? I ask because interfaces often saving face more than engaging in their true thoughts or emotions. That's just one half of the interface equation is extroverted feeling, which does involve saving face, but also involves remembering that appealing to people requires a lot more than just presenting them ideas. You're appealing to them as a person, not just your ideas, right? So it's like I could write down all my thoughts and present them as with one of those text to voice programs that just sort of reads it robotically. But I'm not just presenting ideas. I'm presenting myself as a human being as well, and people have perceptions about both things. What about FISE? Physical deliberation plus physical action. But how is that particular pairing more native to static systems as opposed to dynamic systems? It's not. It's, I see what you're saying. It's more native to static systems in the sense that it wants to know clearly how it feels about something and then take action. If you want to deliberate about something for a while, that means you want to assume that circumstances outside of you are not going to change, that the system is static, that it's waiting for you to finish deliberating. This is true of TI users and FI users. The thing is, FI is a function that's most native to the physical real-time experience, right? But even if it is native to the physical real-time experience, it's still a slow function compared to a knowledge function, for example. A knowledge function is a receive function, which means you have the knowledge in full and it requires no further attention. A deliberation function is a get function, which means it's trying to figure out what status to afford this thing. If you're spending time trying to figure out what status to afford something, then you're assuming, you're operating under the assumption that the thing you're trying to figure out isn't changing as you're trying to figure it out. So deliberation functions necessarily go along with more static systems, regardless of whether they're physical things, because they have to assume that the system remains basically unchanged. Explain what I mean by interface to you, like an NTI, like polar 5-year-old. Okay, well, so TE is an interface function because it's reactive to data in real time. In other words, it's an interface function because. All right. Well, let me come up with a good example here. Let's say that somebody says to you, somebody says to you, "Hey, I've got a problem with my computer. I can't hear anything out of the TV speakers. I plug it in to the TV and I can see the picture, but I can't hear anything out of the TV speakers." Now, TI will sit there and go, "Well, you know what? It's probably links to, your little microphone thing down there at the bottom. You can click that, it'll tell you where your outputs are. You should probably do blah, blah, blah." TI wants that to be the case, right? That it can, without knowing anything, without seeing anything, without interfacing it at all, with knowing only what it knows from the past, basically, SI, from its own experience, that it can conclude what's wrong with your TV and why you can't get audio out of your TV. A TE person will sensibly say, I could walk you through it, but I need to be on the phone with you, or I could go look at it, but I can't tell you what's wrong with it right now unless I interface with it myself or walk you through interfacing it with it. So this is an example of a different kind of thinking. TI people don't conclude necessarily that things that require interface actually require interface. So a dumb move for a 6-slot TE people like me, a person like me, might be, okay, I know the gate's broken because I need to replace the piece that goes in through the meow thing. I need to replace this little peg or whatever. Well, as a TI person, I'll go to the hardware store without measuring it, without even thinking about it any further, thinking I have all the information I need because I know the identity of the thing that I need to replace, and I'm going to the hardware store where I will locate that thing, right? Of course, I didn't measure it, and I didn't realize there are like 6 different versions of that thing, each slightly different, and that the screw holes in the flat part of the thing are positioned either here or here, and it depends on where they are, it's whether they're going to fit onto my thing, yada, 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 right? A TE person will bring the thing with him because they will go, I understand that this is a dynamic system, that I'm not going to try to TI logic it too much because there are elements of it that are too dynamic here that I'm not going to be able to anticipate. So, does that help clarify it more? Octavio Silva, David Sanderson, everybody else? I hope so. TI users know how to do. TI users know how to do. I don't understand what that means. Well, Chris Chapin, that makes you a cyclops. It's what's known as Cyclops. Because it's the equivalent of having only one eye if your two eyes represented your 8 functions. And that one closed. Sleeping Cyclops, they call you. You're Chris Chapin, the sleeping Cyclops. Don't be such a sleeping Cyclops. Cyclops. ISTP are the hardcore gamers who trash INTJ nerds in League. Eric's FE is working overtime tonight. Yeah, you mean I'm being very polite and non-fighty, or what? If someone wanted to learn about cognitive functions, where would you point them? I'd point them to Exciting Tables and Words About Human Personality, although it's somewhat dated. It's a book I made some time back. I'd point them to a couple of documents that I'll link here. If you're new around here, what I will tell you is something that people never really like to hear, and understandably are very skeptical about, which is the simple truth is I'm basically the only person who understands it all correctly, or people who are agree with me about it, you know. So, and the reason for that is complicated and long and tiresome to explain, but it is the case nevertheless. So what am I getting this guy? Oh yeah, that thing. And those important documents. If you want important documents, you've come to the right place. You have come to the right place. This is important document town. Oh yeah. Here's Typology Quick Reference Guide. Okay, we're going to share that first. It's a quick reference guide that you can use to quickly reference for quick referencing. You'll like that. It will be the most delightful delight you've ever delighted in since delighting became a thing. And there you go. And then I'm going to get another important document. Oh yeah. So important. If you love important documents, you're going to absolutely adore this important document. I just got to find it first. Whatever it is called, something about something. There it is. Oh yeah. This is a really, really sensual, deeply, deeply personal document. It's got a lot of intimacy in it. It's like if you had a whole bucket of intimacy, you still wouldn't have as much intimacy as this has. And there's a tender intimacy to it that you'll never ever forget. If you're like me, you love a tender intimacy. Yeah, 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 yeah. So there are some documents there for you. Thanks for the documents. Now I don't need you anymore. Correct. That's okay. I don't mind being used, abused, and used and choosed. I've got a halo, see? Oh, oh, holy typology. Oh, ravenous Roush. We're all retarded in our own way. For some of us, retardation is shyness. For others, retardation might be anger. For still others, their retardation might be mental retardation. It's hard to say. But I do think you were just seeing any demonstrative yesterday when I was looking at what? Did I say you were an ENTV? I don't think I said you were anything. Did I? Did I say you were something? Not that I recall. I don't watch porn and think it's melting brains of the entire population. Anecdotally, you mean, well, I said, oh, that seems kind of ENTP-ish. Well, maybe, it's quite possible I could be correct about something seeming ENTP-ish, but without being wrong about anything, because I'm not claiming you're an ENTP. I just said something seemed ENTP-ish. David Sanderson's an SIS. Cloud, you're not an ISTJ. You silly goose. That's just silly. You've done too much DMT and now you're all types. How sad it would be to be all types. Here's why. Is there an easy way to safely check that an INFJ is one? I wish they had an easily checked polar. Yeah, it's a tough one, especially for an INTJ to tell, maybe because they're FE polar, But I would say it's well, they're one of the hard. No, there's not an easy way. It takes some time. You got to work them. That's the answer to that. Do you think SE or TE polar would be worse for figuring out knowing their way around a place? I would say TE polar would be worse. Because I think that links in with SI, actually, more than TE. And so TE polar is going to, well, I mean, then you have SI Dom with TE polar, but with SE polar, you got SI third in both cases. So I would say SI third in both cases would be stronger than SI first in one case and SI polar in the other. Or I guess it would be SI eighth in the other, huh? Maybe I'm wrong with that. Maybe SI first and eighth is stronger. So in that case, it would be TE polar would be better at it, I guess. SE polar would be worse at it. I don't necessarily think either of those links into it, though. I think people who would be worst at it would be ENTJs and ENFJs, who probably just, they don't know their way around places because they don't remember the place physically very well. They just sort of follow maps and stuff, I would guess. Imagine being an ESFP with 160 IQ, best type. I mean, I think there's a fairly low cap on IQ scores for ESFPs just because IQ tests prioritize conditional reasoning too much, which is not fair, of course, but that's the nature of IQ tests. Is it possible to see your NI as an NI Dom because I haven't noticed use of any NI in me besides knowing where I want to be in the future? Well, I guess that would depend on how you understand NI. I think you probably have a misconception of it. It's not so much a thing you do as a frame of reference. For example, here's an example. Do you know the potato touch story? It's a good example, so I'll tell it, even though I use it a lot as an example. I was at a restaurant one time that I went to fairly often called Norm's. And I noticed when I was sitting at the counter that when you order the meal and you get a potato, when people ordered the meal and they got the potato, the waiter or waitress would touch the ends of the potato with their fingers, would push it open, and then scoop some butter into it. And so I noted them doing this to other people's meal, and I said, next time I come here and I order a meal, I'm going to make sure to watch. I sit at the counter, I'm going to make sure and watch and make sure that they don't touch my potato. So next time I came, I ordered a meal, and I did sit there and I watched and waited for the waiter to touch my potato, right? And then before I could quite see what had happened, my plate was being delivered to me. And I looked at it and I realized I had ordered rice pilaf. Okay? That's SI. Well, how do like, but gosh, Eric, I mean, are you aware of using SI there? Well, if you understand it correctly, yeah, that's SI, okay? Because I remembered and was focused on what to look out for because of the condition I had established for myself. I ordered a meal. The NI truth that I didn't order a potato never hit me. So using NI means realizing when you order the meal and don't order the potato that you're no longer at risk for having them touch your potato and therefore ceasing to watch them try to touch your potato. Now, if that happened in your life, would you recognize that as an instance of you using an I or not? The answer is no. So the problem here is you misconceive what introverted intuition is. What are the concrete differences between the two NTP types? Meaning, how can you tell the difference when interacting with one? I mean, it's not that easy to articulate, right? It's like it's a complicated thing. There are um, I can explain the difference function-wise, which is to say one of those types is a judger and one of them is a perceiver. ENTP is a perceiver and INTP is a judger. Functionally, that plays out as, um, you know, they ideate within an overall frame of establishing certain statuses for things that they want to stay that way once they've established them. In other words, extroverted intuition once rendered into introverted thinking conclusiveness is not something that should thereafter be revisited um, because you took a long time to decide it in the first place. However, INTPs will take a longer time to decide to put it in that place, but once it's there, they want it to stay there, right? INTPs don't care about it staying that way or not because it's instrumental TI and instead of absolute value TI. Now, you might point out that somebody like me obviously cares about it staying in place, which is to say, I don't revisit ideas once I think I've gotten the right idea, but that's partially because I'm engaging in such a complicated set of ideas. I'm very far along in my intellectual development, etc. Most people who watch this are going to be younger, under 30, a lot of them, ENTPs and INTPs, and they're going to be in a different place developmentally necessarily because we are both SI dependent types. We need to develop the knowledge and skills that we use later on in life to have the answers to questions like this, right? Let's see. Norm Macdonald is not dumb. You just don't understand the depth of his NI. Norm Macdonald has some very poor humor and probably some good instances of humor as well. What happened to your INTP typing session that Becky was in? And Becky thought he was INFP until she asked him the kidnapper pill question. I took down any video that I had with Becky in it because she requested that I do so. In fact, she did more than request. She threatened, but I took them down anyway. You know, I don't want to give her any ground on which to claim some sort of privacy violation, even though she agreed to them all in the first place. You know, she launched sort of privacy objections, which I already went through and I had to take them all down. So, you know, but that's the kind of person she is. INFJ and ISFJ can't understand how long something will take, is a better way to put it, because they have no concept of time in their minds. It is generally true that INFJs and ISFJs both, when asked to anticipate how long completing a given task will take, they seem to not attend to that question at all. It's nice and expresses as a nice kind of patience and floatiness in an INFJ. It manifests as impatience in ISFJ. With being able to remember a few details but being annoyed by the SI The more 8th slot SI rather than SI7. Trying to figure out ENFJ or INFJ. I mean, I don't know how easy it is to self-test on something like that. If I were testing you, I would push for more anecdotal stories that explain concepts. The more anecdotal stories you have that explain your concepts, the more likely you are INFJ. The less you direct yourselves towards anecdotal stories to exemplify concepts, the more you are ENFJ. So, what does this mean? How does that look actually? Well, it looks like INFJs will say, "Oh, I'm talking about socionics relationships. And here's a quality of socionics relationship, the supervisor relationship, that is expressing how the supervisor doesn't notice the supervisee." Rachel will say, "For example, I was working under an ENTJ during the summer, and he didn't notice I even existed hardly, barely knew my name." And she'll add a few more sort of general details into that thing about how it was while she was working for that person. She might additionally be able to come up with have a story that's more specific than that. The next level of specificity is, like this one time I was in his office and he meow 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 meow, right? Those are levels of specificity. So ENFJ will produce the first, well, here's an example. I once worked for an ENTJ who behaved in the following ways that are consistent with what you're saying. Who didn't remember my name hardly, didn't know I existed. It seemed like didn't seem to give any weight into my contribution, etc. Okay, well, it's an example from their past where they've had personal experience that has confirmed this idea, but it's not really SI. To get real SI is to say, for example, this one time in his office, I said meow meow meow, and he said meow meow meow, and he looked so mad at meow meow meow, right? So you should ask yourself then, Scott R., about a couple such things, a couple such general ideas, and to see if you can come up with the first level of specificity. Yeah, like this one time when I worked at meow, then this sort of general thing happened. And then also see if you can come up then with the second level of specificity, which is, for example, this one time. If you can consistently do that second one, then you're probably an INFJ. All right, let's see here. Can an ENTP become highly attentive of their significant other's needs? How long does it take for them to learn subtleties about their partner in comparison to other types? Octavio Silva, the reality is, an ENTP starts off highly attentive to their significant other's needs, but they can't sustain it. So I need an easy squeezy relationship. I need ultimately a non-demanding, happy, content girlfriend. You know, I need that. Her needs, fortunately, go along with me just fine. In other words, I need to be allowed to do what I want to do when I want to do it, and I'd like her to be around. She doesn't want to have things demanded of her either, and that's the beauty of it, right? She doesn't want me to telling her what to do or putting expectations on her or putting burdens on her or anything. She's a slacker too. You know, she's a type 7 as well. So for me, it's actually important that I not have to be attentive to the person's needs. At first I think, oh, I can be attentive to their needs, but over the long term I really can't. I need them to be not very attentive to my needs either, frankly. It just needs to naturally happen like it does with me and Rachel, where we get along really well. It's easier and more pleasant doing things as a couple, regardless, than not. You know, most time stuff I'm trying to do or want to do, Rachel doesn't have necessarily any interest in being included in all of it, which is great. It'll give me time to do my own thing. And sometimes she does. If I have an interest in including her, she definitely likes to be included. but she's got plenty of her own shit she likes to do too. We watch a lot of movies together, a lot of different things. It doesn't require me to think about it. It's easy squeezy. With that, while at the same time, I do care greatly about her happiness, right? So, to the extent something is critical to her happiness, is something I will attend to. But if she has a lot of different little needs that are critical to her happiness, that relationship's not going to work over the long term because I just can't sustain that kind of attention to FI shit. And don't want to. You think Becky may be ENFP? I don't remember whether I explicitly tested her TI or not. I just don't remember from back then. At the time, I was quite convinced she was ENTP based on her argumentation style and a bunch of other stuff. But I'm not sure if I really hardcore tested her TI or not. If she passed the TI test, I believe, she seemed to generally pass that TI thing, then she's an ENTP, but she probably has some sort of attachment disorder or personality disorder, would be my guess. ENTP with personality disorder, which makes her seem a little bit more like an ENFP. I want to understand TI in regards to ego or arrogance. Well, TI people are, if you're TI 1 or 2, then you believe yourself responsible for and qualified to evaluate other people's arguments and reasoning and conclusions and such. And the reason is because you're versed in the most universal of parsing metrics, namely the communicative metric, that things have to be grammatically and what's that word? Diction wise, they have to match up with our expectations and standards and stuff. My voice is kind of shot, is what it boils down to. It's like I've been yelling or something, but I haven't been. I just basically smoking too much, and I've got a bit of I've lost my voice a little bit. Let's see here. How does a 7th or 8th slot SI user debate empirics? Well, I would expect that it depends where the TE is more than the SI. If I'm not sure what you mean by how, but do you mean if they have 7th or 8th slot SI, are they more likely to come in with paper prepped? Is that what you mean? Because NI 3rd, you're looking at NI 4th. NI 3rd is definitely more likely to come in prepped, especially ISTP. NI 4th, ESTP come in relatively prepped. ESFP though, they'll just look at Cloud. That's however he does it, that's how it's done. Because they will forget a lot, so there's a learning integration to force that user internalize the information properly. Often I'll read something interesting, but let me see here. Reciprocal burdens can be treated as TE conditional. And that doesn't make any sense. I mean, it's you might note a TE utility to them. That's just an example of you using a utility frame to interpret something. It's not a quality of the thing. Okay. Alright, so Eric, how does an epi 5th slot clean their nails? Very carefully. Often I'll read something interesting and completely forget what it was that I read. How does physical NE manifest in ISFPs? That's not a bad question. I would say very real-timey. In other words, maybe looking through a camera and choosing a certain image from a variety of angles or something, might be an expression of it. Sculpting might be an expression of it. But I would say more than any metaphysical does, probably. I think she said she thought she was ENFP. I will say from what I've heard about her and Eric, she does seem very concerned with her personal opinions about others for an ENTP. I mean, yeah, she's kind of. I mean, she absolutely despises me. But that actually kind of makes more sense for an ENTP than an ENFP. I'm not sure. Eric, how do TI blind people cross the street at full moon on Saturday? Also, very carefully. I zoned out. If you zone out, you're probably an INFJ. Any 7th slot can come up with ideas if it's something in the immediate environment. Yeah, I think so. Like, hey, let's stick that stick onto this thing to make a sculpture is probably the sort of real-time, any physical ideation that is comfortable for ISFPs. Obviously, I experience a lot of introverted feeling in the moment, in various moments. Good night, Ravenous Roush. The other people probably aren't real? I'm glad you're convinced I'm real. Good night, good fright. Ali Malik, when people say TI builds an internal model, what does that mean exactly? Like, what do they mean by model or framework? So, basically, it's introverted thinkers want to deliberate out certain topics, right, to come to certain conclusions about them and be able to defend those conclusions as either affirmations or negations. So over time, especially NETI, will gather a variety of bits of affirmations and negations, explanations, arguments made, arguments won, arguments lost, whatever. And we'll start to put together an overarching framework in which all those arguments are consistent. Like, for example, I talk about my TI framework within a larger, basically, TE frame, I guess, or meta TI frame of giving the appropriate jurisdictions to the appropriate values that correlate with the given functions. But it doesn't change the fact that I'm fundamentally going to express my own bias as a TI user, but it's also the case that in this instance, TI genuinely is the appropriate function for the job. So, making a framework is important, which is to say, it wouldn't work if I abandoned the reasoning I used to justify mya and replaced it with totally different reasoning to justify mya if mya and mya seemed to contradict each other. Like, if I were to say, well, we need to put in trees here on the street to increase shade, and we all vote yes. Then the next day I advocate, we need to take down the trees over there because they create too much shade and their bad guys can hide in the shade. You'd say, but didn't just yesterday you say we should put those there because we want more shade? Now, if their reasons were totally different, then nobody would have that objection, right? So that's what it means to have a framework, is to keep in mind the sort of reasoning one uses from one thing to another. And the better you get at it, the more leveled up in terms of meta you get as far as classes of argument and stuff like that. And you understand this class of argument as being, as linking to other classes of arguments in certain concrete ways. David Sanderson, reciprocal burdens can be treated as TE conditional. I just don't understand what you mean by that. TE is not operating in a conditional world. It's operating, when it's operating metaphysically, it's operating in an ordinal space, not a conditional space. And the difference being, ordinality is typically algorithmic. It's recipe-ish, whereas conditionality is instead architectural. So, frameworks generally used in programming languages to simplify the coding process, right? So that kind of understanding of like cascading stuff, that's all TI. The FI is draining, do you understand? I can perform any at the beginning of a relationship, but quickly become aggravated when I need to continue using it long term. Exactly. So I don't need to be. I need to not be asked for long term. Fortunately, Rachel countervalues FI. She doesn't want it anyway. Um, what will your debate against Joe Biden look like? Really depressing. Um, a really depressing Effie walk around this man's unbelievable dementia? I'm not sure. If you've been called selfish, you're FI. If you've been called arrogant, you're TI. Accurate? Pretty damn accurate, Sergey Rachmaninoff. An excellent question. Are you more likely to be called selfish or arrogant? That's a great question. A great point there, Captain and Captain Captain Rachmaninoff. Ha! Then I'm FI, says Fabiola. Um, let's see here. Why I jumped ahead. Don't listen to Cloud's INFP bashing, okay? Nobody listen to Cloud's INFP bashing. Yeah. No, I think that's quite true. Seriously saying if you've been called selfish, you're ISFI, and if you've been called arrogant, you're more likely to be TI. I think that's absolutely the case. Eric, which would have a hard time finding their type starting out? An NE user or TI demonstrative? Is the demonstrative as strong as the auxiliary I've heard before? Not really. It just looks that way to outsiders because it's more demonstrative, you know. I would say it depends where the NE is. You're giving me where the TI is. You got to give me a specific slot for the NE as well to compare apples to apples. Um, Most introverts probably come off as selfish. I don't think so. I don't think INTPs come off as selfish. I wish I knew what my blind slot function was because something's missing. I can tell it's always been there, but I'm not sure what it is. I don't know either. Damn, you are behind, Eric. Cancel culture is generally a good thing. I don't believe that this is true or that we should ever treat it as true uncritically. A lot of people in university think we should. I'm not exactly sure what qualifies as cancel culture, but to the extent that I understand what it is, I agree with you. Um, let's see. World War II fought with atomic bombs. World War III we fought with tweets. Most accurate thing you've ever said, Cloud, says Morange. But then again, chess is simply a skill. Bring it on, Ollie. I take that as a challenge. I suggest ISFP or something similar, but you don't have to believe me. We're up in place 48. I'm not serious, but I really just like chess, lol. You will beat me because you're an INTJ. Eric versus Biden will be like a silverback gorilla versus a toddler with a wheelchair. Exactly. In a world beyond blackened ichor filled with a crumbling sky as souls where there's nothing but I refuse to fade. Who's that a quote of? That's an interesting quote. You're quoting McQuotertons. Um, Ethan McDonald, I will say I know for certain that Eric wouldn't type me as ENXP or ENXJ, however I'm questioning of his method. Eric has the best method I've seen so far. You know for certain because why? You really think ESFP couldn't be called arrogant? No, I don't think that's the case. I just say that as a general rule, there's probably a genuine correlation that if somebody's been called selfish, it's more likely that that's going to correlate with an FI using type than Somebody being called arrogant is going to more likely correlate with the TI type. I don't think ISFJs, for example, are especially likely to be called arrogant or selfish, right? But I nevertheless suspect they're probably more likely to be called arrogant than selfish. No, I'm saying? No, what I'm saying? Cool, Super Walker. You know what? If you use Google Calendar, then you can invite me to a conversation. If it's my schedule is pretty open right now. I got a 4 o'clock tomorrow I need to put in, but then I'll just accept that invitation and we can meet then and chat if you'd like. If you don't use Google Calendar, then you could email me a specific time slot and day that you'd like to do that, and I'll let you know. If it's a problem, probably won't be, is the thing. My schedule is pretty open at the moment. This is Jeff. Put it in my 4 o'clock tomorrow before I forget about it. Oh no, I moved that to 2. That's right, because of my thing tomorrow. And then tomorrow evening I've got Delilah's coming over for dinner. Like, yeah, 6 to 7 or something. Hi, Trouble. I'll get you some dinner. Just chill out. I gotta feed this cat out here. Yes, Trouble. I will get you something. Just relax. Okay, there. Added email. Okay, so I gotta go feed this cat now. So give me a second. To feed this cat, please. Hi, Trouble. Okay, buddy. Okay, buddy, old pal. I'll give you some cat food. You silly old goose, you. Who's the silliest goose in all of Kittydom, huh? Is it you? Well, oh well. I gave Trouble too much. A little something I like to call mucking the bang. It's not cat food. It's like pulled chicken. Why haven't I become a Twitch streamer? Well, for one thing, isn't that mostly for games? And secondly, I'm invested in this platform in terms of it's where I consistently post work, it's where I consistently live stream. And even if one could argue that Twitch afforded some higher ceiling or something, there's probably still a time investment curve to it. Anything like this is going to have some sort of time investment curve to it, unless you're instantly just like viral brilliant or something. Which type of person is the best person to have sex with? Your true love. It's probably your dual. I mean, your adjusted dual. I mean, up to in place 48. That's one of those questions that at most can ever give me either consistent or inconsistent with something else. Okay? I don't put a lot of weight in those kind of questions. I'm looking to see how up front or near the surface of a stack of arguments or a stack of thoughts are concerns for the emotional well-being of all the parties, okay? Putting themselves in other people's shoes. Is it determinate as to anything? No. And I don't use it as such. It's one piece of a lot of evidence that work together to provide me the best possible understanding of a person's type as per the evidence in front of me. So it's like it up then plates for questions like that. It's always going to be possible to say, hey, but there are going to be some people who are going to miscue on this. In other words, give you a false positive or a false negative. That's true for those kind of questions. That's why the skills questions are so important, and why we can only use those kind of questions. Self-reporting questions are the least reliable, remember. We use those kind of questions mostly not so much to determine anything based on the answer, but to determine on how the person answers in comparison to other people. So it's going to be very difficult for anybody watching one of those things to understand what I'm gleaning from the experience of talking to them about it. There's going to be misconceptions all over the place that I'm coming to conclusion XYZ because of reason ABC that are not true at all. The fact is, things that are factors in a decision, things that are consistent or inconsistent with the decision, are just that. Whereas things that are determinate are just that. There are very few things in typology that are determinate. SI polar is pretty damn determinate, as is TI polar, which is determinate of cutting you down to two possible types. Those things are determinate. Most things aren't. And so it's critical that when evaluating questions and stuff, you evaluate them as examples of what they are. Yes, self-reporting questions are terrible, which is why I'm generally not really gleaning a lot of information from the answer, but rather from how the person answers. So you can tell how much I mean, well, you've got to have a lot of experience at it too. I've done it a lot. I've talked to a lot of different people and seen a lot of different examples of these kind of answers, right? So I have an understanding of where it fits in the spectrum. I have plenty of times, Octavio. I made a video. I mean, the document I shared earlier called Quick Reference Typing Guide. It goes through exactly that. The last few videos I did where, yeah, I do that all the time. I mean, I did it recently. Let's see. Let's see if I can find it for you. Like this one. Hi friends, host Eric here, talking to French people, and a very happy 4th of July to you. Rachel and I... Yeah, I know, Octavio. The thing is, you know, I'm accustomed to repeating myself plenty, and I have no problem with that. And you know, I will make more videos about that. I would like to finish that sort of series and do other functions besides NI. NE correlates with imagination and originality. NE correlates with ideation and creativity. It values novelty. A little bit different, but similar. So, in other words, depending on where NE is in the stack, if it's top of the stack, you will have an implicit value novelty, and you will be expressive of both ideation and creativity. Now, because you're expressing both ideation and creativity, and because you value novelty, you will probably end up producing things that correlate with originality. As far as imagination goes, the thing about originality and imagination in general, both, is NI will be an expression of imagination as well, or intuition, and good NI ideas. In other words, good. Well, remember, NI is a knowing function. So NI is how we know whether something's good, but we might also receive entirely a good idea on occasion. Generally, NI works on things that are extant, which is to say, there's a bunch of NE in front of them, and they know which aspects of those NE things are most true and worthwhile and original and imaginative and stuff, right? But extroverted intuition, in contrast, is ideational. It generates ideas, and it's creative in the sense that it likes to render those ideas into objects of some sort. A phone call at this hour? Who's calling? Hi, Delilah. Yeah. Like 5:30? Alright, cool. Is Danny coming? Okay, cool. When you said a cake thing, are you bringing a cake or am I getting a cake? We have a cake. We still have cake left over from last time. Still have plenty of that Baskin Robbins cake left. Yeah, I'll make food, or Dad is gonna get food, one of the two. I suggested I barbecue, but he said he wants to maybe get Panda Express. Okay, cool. Thank you for calling and confirming with me. Love you. See you tomorrow. Bye. Oh, what a good daughter. Makes my heart feel FI. I feel a lot of FI for like 5 seconds. Yeah, I'd already forgotten about it. Cloud's mostly just a provocateur. He just says random shit, dude. You can't put too much weight into it. Love is blooming in the chat. Ooh, who's getting on whom? Where's the juicy gossip? I want to hear. No, I haven't done that Strengths Finder thing. You know, one of the things that I could do to probably improve income a bit from this thing is to generate a paid test myself. But I don't. You know, if I was going to generate a paid test, then I'd expect it to be pretty reliable, and I don't know if I can generate such a test that's multiple choice, really. Eric, do you like Star Trek? Yeah, I like Star Trek. I like the original Star Trek. I think it's cool. I like, you know, what's his name? Captain Kirk and Spock and stuff. I didn't type Cloud. I've never typed Cloud. Cloud, I think is I believe he's an ESFP, but I've never typed him formally. It did this time, Ali. He's not an ENFP. He could, I mean, you know. I mean, yeah, I kind of do at this point, Claude. I've spent enough time with you that even though I've never typed you, you're definitely an ESFP. I mean, I don't know what else to tell you, man. He's not abstract at all. He uses abstract ideas as like as though they were pokes with a stick, you know? He's not intuitive at all. He's not remotely intuitive. He's not remotely abstract. Those things that seem like abstract ideas are just ways of him poking people with sticks. It's as sensory as you can possibly get. It's just in a metaphysical plane. I mean, I've encountered ESFPs online before in the community. They're in this community means they're going to be engaging about some sort of abstract ideas in some sense because, after all, they're typing words with their fingers and that's what people talk about. But it's a matter of how they engage with ideas that determines where their intuition is. It's not just intuitives who are interested in talking on this live stream. There are sensors who are interested in it as well. And there's nothing wrong with Cloud just because he's an ESFP. I like the fact that he's an ESFP because he's the only one we have currently, and he's not unlike other ESFPs. He's not made himself unbearable. that have others in the past. Difficult, sure. Provocative, sure. But not unbearable. Tucker Carlson. Probably a weak ENTP, I think. Well, everyone can think whatever they want about cloud and so forth. How do INTJs deal with ESFPs? INTJs don't seem to begrudge ESFPs their arbitrariness. It kind of goes with the territory with INTJs. They understand that it's important for things to validate on your own arbitrary reasons. That's what it means to have third slot FI, you know? Yeah, he might be. Yeah, I think he's just a weak kind of give up ENTP, you know? ISTJs think politeness is manipulation. Yeah. Any struggle. SI wife shows a funny pic. I read some words, determine I understand the meaning, and laugh. When she asks if I got the joke, I say yes, but didn't read every word. 20-minute combo on the details. You got a reminder. Exactly, up in place. You got to explain to your SI wife. Look, remember, I'm highly intuitive, and I understand the whole a lot more quickly than you do. I can't intuit the whole thing. So just cut me a little slack. I mean, Cameron's very polite too, but nobody asked what's an ISTJ's relationship to their own politeness or something like that. Is what do ISTJs think about politeness in general as a topic? What they think about politeness as general as a topic is that it's fake. It's people being fake to manipulate them. That doesn't mean they're not polite themselves. You know. I think he uses any to appeal to FE users with fear. I mean, he's forced to be more reductive probably than he wants to be by his job, and it sort of has sapped the soul out of him, I think. That'll be my guess. Yeah, I mean, ISTJs make amazing friends. They really care about you, and they don't care about FE shit. Would you consider it appropriate to call cognitive functions skills? No. I think that a cognitive function can link to a skill, but whether or not that skill is measurable is determined by the function. So, if you're talking about TI, yeah, it links very precisely to a skill. If you're talking about SI, it links less precisely, but just as testably to a skill. There's a lot more to SI than just recalling details and stuff like that. It's reductive to think of it as simply a memory thing. It's a frame of reference that is how you look at what you know. What counts as knowledge? What sort of knowledge you look to as a default? I think that guy Milo, whatever his last name is, I think he's an ENTP too. If I'm thinking about the right guy. Again, he's an ENTP that stopped climbing up the mountain. A lot of ENTPs stopped climbing up the mountain. For whatever reason, because I never got anywhere, I just kept climbing up the mountain, you know? So here I am still climbing up the mountain. which means I'm more noble and honest and real than most ENTPs, ultimately, if I want to be engaged in an honest self and other assessment. I'm just more realized, you know. Milo didn't need to be realized in order to attain success, so why would he, right? This is FE third. If it validates enough on FE third, then if you get enough of that kind of validation while halfway up the mountain, you won't get any higher up the mountain. I don't think he's I don't think he's ENFP. Cognitive functions can be improved, right? No, not really. The thing to remember is any attention you purposely direct away from your native functions is attention kind of wasted. It's possible to train your left hand to be more used than it currently is, but you have to sacrifice opportunities to use your right hand. So, because your right hand, if you're right-handed, is inherently stronger, you're better served to just be right-handed than to try to balance your left hand into the mix. Now, your third and fourth function will manifest as improved, at least from an external perspective, as you age and mature over time, probably, assuming you're on a good growth arc. But intentionally trying to improve cognitive functions is a fool's errand, to say the least. Second function can, I guess, be improved depending on the type of the function. Your fundamental TI nature won't change, but if you learn formal conditional logic, I guess that would be an improvement in it or something like that. No, it's not intentionally improving it, Octavio. You can't improve it, okay? You've got your nature is such that the majority of the hours in any given day you spend are going to be spent in the frame of FI and SE. That's just who you are, your FISE. Now, it is true that your life will be better when your fourth slot is incorporated in a more balanced fashion in your life, by and large, especially if you're having any sort of problems. If you're not having any problems and you're thriving without relying on your fourth function, you'll be perfectly happy to avoid it. It's also possible to have that successfully delegated to somebody else or something else. So the internet is a good way to delegate your TE, because you just have to look up how do I meow, and somebody else will give you instructions about it. You don't have to figure it out yourself. It's a shortcut around your TE. I've seen that movie plenty of times. You mad, bro? I would say no. Nobody's ever told me that, and if they did, I would probably say you're not making a very accurate comparison in terms of our appearances. Our cat is fifth cloud. But can't there be a distinction between one's physical habits and one's cognitive habits? Perhaps they are not all the same. I mean, the right-hand, left-hand analogy isn't accurate. Well, I mean, the right-hand, left-hand analogy is accurate in the sense that it explains how there's exclusivity. It's not accurate in the sense that handedness is a more simple phenomenon than a cognitive function, which is why I say cognitive functions are not just skills, because, for example, everybody's capable of muscle memory. Muscle memory is a form of SI that is basically a machine code level of SI. So it doesn't matter if you're Billy Joel, an ENFJ, or me, an ENTP, your muscles will learn the chords that you're playing on the piano or the guitar, respectively. Or remember them, quote unquote, in a way that doesn't require you to figure it out as you're playing. Okay? So that's an example of SI muscle memory. That occurs, essentially, you're paying attention to what you already know, but you don't have to think about it already. That's the difference between knowledge and deliberation. You notice functions more when you're aware of the distinctions between them more. You're more slave to your functions when you have less meta-awareness. Metacognition liberates you from just being an expression of your function bias, and then, but not because it lets you then deviate from your function bias, but because it lets you recognize your function bias and occasionally at least make decisions that take that into account. So, being able to recognize that my fundamental issue here is going to be one where I need to prioritize. If I'm going to be convincing people politically, for example, that I'm a good candidate for president, then I'm going to need to be succeeding mostly on FE grounds. Does that mean improving my FE? No. It does mean attending more to it during certain times when I recognize it as essential in being more communicatively successful. So the fact that I'm, in general, of late, being more attentive to my FE while making videos of all sorts, be they live streams or be they uploaded videos, and less inclined towards ranting and yelling and stuff, is in fact a conscious decision. Does that mean I've improved my FE? No. It means I've prioritized it more and compelled myself to pay attention to it more during certain contexts because I made a decision about what I wanted to do, and it's a necessary component in completing that course of action. So, you could say, well, look at Eric, his FE's gotten a lot better. That's not true. I've decided to pay attention to it more or include it in more of my video makings that also makes it less natural for me. So, in other words, because I'm attending to tone more and trying to be more inclusive and trying to be less dismissive and trying to be more civil in general, I'm responding less reflexively because I'm having to consider the interface qualities, the dynamic system qualities, as well as just the static system qualities of the meanings of the words. I would say Rennie Fox, there's not really any purpose in doing LSD. There's no wisdom particularly to be found in it at all. Thanks, Morich. I appreciate you noticing there. Would you be doing a follow-up typing thing with your new knowledge sometime? I'm interested in know if your previous page stands because I'm slightly unsure of my type. I mean, when did I type you? I'm not sure. I don't generally type people for free, Occasionally I will, but it's not a policy of mine. There's a certain goodness in me just letting loose my upsettedness or whatever, but I've done enough of that. I would say I've outgrown, or it's time for me to outgrow that, whether I naturally have or not. But if you focus on another function, won't you weaken another inadvertently? I will, for sure. So my NETI is slowed down by my incorporation of FE. Now, does that actually mean I've made a worse overall product? I would say no, probably not. So it's only weakened, depending on depending on your perspective. From an external party, you might think of it as weakened, or you might think of it as not weakened. You might think of it as strengthened by the FE because it's made more effective in communication, but it's less fluid and less native to my being and more careful, Okay. So, no, they are skills. Some of them, they link to skills, but they're not skills that you improve on. Things that you do improve on are things that change over the course of your life. They're necessarily definitionally not part of personality. To remind everybody for the millionth time, the definition of personality aspects are aspects of the self that do not change throughout one's life. Things that do change throughout one's life are not aspects of personality type. So it's not sad somehow that it implies stagnation, that you don't change these aspects of yourself. You express them in different ways throughout your life. You prioritize certain aspects of them more than others in certain circumstances. Like I said, what's constant is this relational thing. It's that if I am focused more on FE, then it means my NETI is less native. And in other words, instead of just ranting about how that's not the right way to think about it, I have to try to be nicer, right? And just generally, you know, I mean, they correlate with skills. So to a certain extent, the link between the skill, deductive reasoning, and the function TI is where the link is closest. The most powerful, the most robust link, you could say. But it's less well linked in to other functions as far as testability. You know, it's like it's an equivalently a skill for all of them, but only some of those skills are equivalently testable, so we can only understand them as skills from a third party perspective to the extent that we can test them, you know? Yeah, I mean, all the best rappers are either INFJs or ENTPs, possibly INTPs. But probably INFJs and ENTPs are all the best rappers. And all the bad rappers are SFPs and so forth, you know. All right, I'm going to wrap it up. So, thank you all for being here, and don't forget to eat plenty of delicious cheese.